The Canadian Liberal Party won the 2025 elections. Is Canada saved or doomed? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. The Canadian election results are in, and the Liberal Party has won for the fourth consecutive term. I haven't seen a Liberal win 4 terms in a row since FDR. The party's really rolling on, like FDR. Mark Carney is Canada's newest Prime Minister, and the Liberals are ecstatic and exhilarated. Got them moves there, Mr. Prime Minister. Carney be partying. The Conservatives, well, not so much. Conservatives did make gains in Parliament, but it just wasn't enough. In fact, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, which is the most Canadian-sounding name since Moose Mapleson, lost his seat in Parliament to a Liberal candidate. This came as a major shock to many because it really wasn't that long ago when the Conservatives were in the lead by a long shot. In fact, this graph from CBC News shows poll averages were consistently in the Conservatives' favor, represented here in dark blue, since July 2022. Liberals, meanwhile, represented in red, kept losing support. That is, until 2025. So what changed? How could the Conservatives have lost? What could have happened at the beginning of 2025? Spoiler, it's not what you think. For one, Justin Trudeau, who became really unpopular, resigned from his role as Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party. That certainly shook things up. But the popular explanation for Liberals winning the election is Trump, especially with his 51st state threats and tariffs. Many say Trump helped Liberals look like defenders of Canadian sovereignty by standing up to him, while Conservatives looked too in sync with him, even though Poilievre tried to stand up to Trump. Not just with rhetoric, but with the last name you just know Trump isn't able to pronounce. But things may be more complicated than just it's Trump's fault. Poilievre and Conservative candidates also fumbled in several ways. For one, Poilievre didn't do himself any favors by refusing to get top security clearance, which is something you kind of need for that job. It's like applying to be a cashier at Hot Topic without an eyebrow piercing and 3 ironic tattoos. For context, earlier last year, Canadian National Intelligence raised concerns about foreign interference on both sides of the political aisle. To get access to the details in order to act on it, Poilievre would need security clearance, but he refused. Poilievre argued that getting security clearance would hinder his ability to speak openly and act on what was in the security briefings. Conservatives also brought up concerns that any security clearance process, which requires background checks on family members and disclosure of intimate details, could be weaponized against them by the government for political purposes, which is crazy. I mean, when has the Liberal Party ever weaponized government institutions against its opponents? But Liberals took this opportunity and pounced on his refusal. Then Prime Minister Trudeau suggested that Poilievre had something to hide. And recently, Mark Carney called Poilievre irresponsible for refusing security clearance, which doesn't sound like much of an insult to us Americans, but this is Canada. We're calling someone irresponsible borders on being a hate crime. But things only took a turn for the worse in March this year when the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS, alleged that agents from India organized support for Poilievre's 2022 Conservative leadership bid. So instead of Russiagate, it was Indiagate, which sounds like the name of a place that serves delicious but overpriced tiki masala. CSIS didn't have evidence that Poilievre or members of his inner circle were aware of this, but this put his security clearance back in the spotlight, and people once again asked if Poilievre was hiding something. Poilievre should have just said he was a criminal and embraced it. Worked for Trump. Folks saw his mugshot and thought, now there's a guy who's transparent. Another big problem was that Conservatives weren't talking with the mainstream media enough. They actively avoided traditional media by limiting access to Poilievre, and instead chose to focus more on local news, YouTube videos, and social media feeds. So instead of vote for me, their strategy was more of a smash that like and subscribe. I'm shocked it didn't pan out for them. Conservatives had been riding a wave of distrust of the mainstream media, hoping that this strategy would get them more votes. But while it's true that people are relying more and more on social media to get their news, mainstream media outlets are still a powerful force in politics that politicians just can't ignore, especially when it comes to old people, who tend to have the highest voter turnout. And old people aren't getting their news from reels. unless you mean the kind they played before the movies in the 1940s. In fact, for Canadian boomers, dealing with Donald Trump was their top issue, above less important, trifling matters like making housing affordable. That's more an issue for young Canadians who don't already own a house. Thanks, boomers. But this paid off for the Liberals since they made Trump the central issue for the 2025 election, even though it was supposed to be largely about young Canadians. Young Canadians are sad because instead of focusing on issues, their candidate's entire platform was, "We're not Trump." Welcome to the last 10 years of American politics. On that note, there are tons of problems plaguing Canada that the new Liberal government will have to tackle. The cost of living, which I mentioned, is a huge one. Young people are struggling to find affordable housing and good-paying jobs. And apparently, you can't pay rent and make money by whispering into an ATM, "I'm not Trump." Things are so bad that 4 in 10 Canadians aged 18 to 34 would actually vote to be American if citizenship and conversion of assets to US dollars was guaranteed. If that's not a warning shot, I don't know what is. That's why so many young Canadians favored Conservatives in the election. But now that the Liberals won, what are they offering to young people? Liberals say it's time the Canadian government got back in the business of building affordable homes. They need to fix the mistakes of the party that's been in charge for the last decade. Oh, wait. Whether that'll happen or make much of a dent remains to be seen. However, there are other pressing issues on the Liberal Party's plate. For example, Carney knows that high immigration targets and rising crime are worrying Canadians. That's why he's promising to keep immigration caps and reduce the number of temporary residents, in addition to cracking down on crime with stricter bail laws and more law enforcement officers. And as part of his crackdown on crime, Carney is also promising to reinvigorate a gun buyback program for so-called assault-style firearms. According to Carney, you can't be serious about being tough on crime if you're not willing to be tough on guns. Well, thank goodness. That'll solve the issue. Because as everyone knows, if there's one thing violent criminals love, it's following the law. Free speech is also a major point of concern in Canada. The Trudeau administration wasn't exactly known for being stellar defenders of free speech. It did crack down on the anti-COVID lockdown Freedom Convoy after all, and pushed to crack down on online content, possibly opening the door to government censorship without criminal proceedings. Given that Carney was a close advisor to Trudeau, we might be seeing more of that. See, Carney was an early supporter of government crackdowns against the Freedom Convoy. And at a rally in Hamilton, Ontario, he said he wants to tackle online pollution that washes over Canada's virtual borders from the US. That includes, quote, hatred, a slippery term that could be used to crack down on anything the Liberal Party doesn't like. You didn't give a like to their 5-star review of the live-action Snow White on Letterboxd? That's hate speech. There's one big elephant in the room, and it's not Trump or his MAGA Republicans, it's
China!
If you've been following my twin brother, Chris Chappell, over at China Uncensored, you'd know that Canada has been compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. Intelligence has been compromised by spying for China. Canada has become a global center for Chinese money laundering. They have fentanyl super labs, and China is attacking Canadian lawmakers. All while Trudeau turned a blind eye. If you want to learn more about Chinese influence in Canada, I highly recommend you watch my podcast with award-winning Canadian investigative journalist Sam Cooper. I'll put a link below. So, how will Canada's Liberal Party deal with China? Carney has put up a tough stance saying that China doesn't share Canada's values on trade. He's also acknowledged that China is one of the biggest threats of foreign interference and a threat in Asia and the Arctic. But his Liberal Party is tainted with pro-China allies. One of them was a Liberal candidate who's also an alleged honorary director of Jiangsu Commerce Council of Canada, or JCCC, a United Front affiliated agency that promotes Chinese influence. Mr. Yuan claims his role there ended a decade ago. On that note, Carney himself met with some members of the JCCC, although he says he never heard of the group and insists he simply meets thousands of people at events. Carney also has a lot of history that makes people wonder if he's compromised by China as well. He was board chairman at Brookfield Asset Management, a Canadian investment giant that invests in China's property and renewable energy markets, and at Bloomberg, a company that has business interests in China. Definitely raises some eyebrows that Carney praised China.
And China has shown incredible leadership. With President Xi's historic commitments to peak emissions by 2030 and to decarbonizing the Chinese economy by 2060 at the latest. I also want to commend China's efforts in promoting transparent sustainability disclosures by the private sector. I would like to salute the People's Bank of China, who in 2016 published guidelines for establishing the green financial system.
Ah, yes, China is such a leader in environmental protection. So, to put minds at ease, Carney did go through security clearance and has already put his assets into a blind trust. And I sincerely hope Carney and the Liberal Party really get serious about rooting out Chinese influence. This is a serious problem for the U.S. The U.S. cannot afford to have a Chinese communist client state to the north of its borders. But what do you think of Canada's future? Is it bright or bleak? Don't worry, we're not going to shut you out of your bank account for posting your opinions. Leave your comments below. And you can click here to watch that podcast with Sam Cooper about China's deep infiltration into Canada. Just click here. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thank you for watching America Uncovered.